Good evening, everyone. Today is a pleasure to welcome Marina Caneve with us. I will give a short introduction for the public that is coming from outside. Today we spend the afternoon together with Marina, talking a little bit about her project and also exchanging what we are doing here at Fabrica, talking about the research process of the residencies. Marina explores the ambiguity inherent in the role of dominion that man exercises over nature and the tension that emerged from his relationship with other animals. Starting from an analytic study of the network of ecological corridors promoted by the European Union to preserve biodiversity, she creates a visual connection between the infrastructure for wildlife, the video generated by surveillance system, and the landscape of the natural reserves, touching on key issues such as migration and freedom of movement, the rights of non-human animals, and the conservation of ecosystems, and ultimately the possibility of rethinking our anthropocentrism. Her work has shown in national and international institutions such as MAXXI in Rome, Fotohof in Salzburg, Institut Néerlandais in Paris, Palazzo Reale, la Triennale di Milano, la Biennale di Venezia, between many. So, thank you again, Marina, for being with us tonight, and enjoy the lecture.
And thank you for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here talking about this project, Bridges Are Beautiful, which is actually a working title for a project that I'm currently working on and that will be finished at the end of, in spring 2024, so very soon. Bridges Are Beautiful, it's a project I started in 2015. And it is, as mentioned, a research project that takes the Natura 2000 network as a reference for researching the place that we occupy within nature. For some decades, Europe has been engaged in shaping and designing this project which aims to preserve the biodiversity throughout the whole European Union. And the ecological corridors that I've been focusing on, when interrupted by infrastructures, are reconnecting through a network of bridges, aqueducts, and such as wildlife crossings. In 2015, I was living in the Netherlands. I was studying at the Royal Academy of Arts in Den Haag. And actually, I was offered the opportunity to produce a work for an exhibition on the overall topic of paradise, which was something that triggered my imagination, and I started to think about what paradise was for me. And I ended up in thinking about utopias, and all the utopian thinking was at least what I found out was all reconnected with nature, and that allowed me to find my subject because searching for these utopias, I find out about this Natura 2000 and actually this idea of connecting all over Europe for the animals, basically. And the project I started, Bridges Are Beautiful, encouraged us to wonder about how to relate with the environment through the construction of infrastructures for the other, through a system of such infrastructure and through the studies of the otherness, the animals in this case. I'm finishing this project thanks to a grant from the Italian Ministry of Culture, which is called the Italian Council, and which aims to promote the Italian art abroad and also which aims to implement the Italian public collections. And it was really important for me to get this grant because it's really about my subject. It's really about moving, and it's really about connecting. And the project will end up with an exhibition, first at the UGM Gallery in Maribor, and then a solo show at the FFVAV, Foundation for the Visual Arts in Modena. This is a screenshot of a map that I've been working on, which I made myself to start to understand what this thing of bridges for the animals was really meaning. And it was really difficult to make this map because there's not real, there is not actually a real map of all these infrastructures. Because even though this project is a European project, we still are dealing with different countries that have their own, even naming system. These bridges for the animals in some countries are called aqueducts, in some other are called wildlife crossings, so they have always different names. And thanks to these names, I could kind of realize where they were and where they placed it and how every country was dealing with them. Surprisingly, Italy has almost no bridge for the animal. I just discovered there are few in Abruzzo, but that's all. And for me, it was really touching as well. I started this project when I was living, I said, in the Netherlands. And as you can see from the map, Netherlands is a country where there is a huge concentration of these bridges. There are more than 80 large bridges and then tons of smaller ones for smaller animals. And you should also think that this project is quite recent. I mean, Europe is working for 20 years on it, but the idea of building bridges for the animals is something that has a long history, and actually which started in the 17th century in France with smaller structures that were constructed just to helping animals to move. I've been photographing bridges in different countries, and with the idea of, with a quote from Thomas Bernhard in my mind, "Our roads are roads laid out by men," which let me imagine that actually this secondary road is also a road that we build for the others. In contemporary society, passengers are freight transport intensifying, having more than doubled in Europe in the last 25 years. Such an increase calls for further development of the infrastructure network consisting of roads, motorways, railways, and inland waterways. At the same time, however, our society recognizes the irreplaceable role played by biodiversity for a number of ecological, economic, and social reasons. The development of the road infrastructure and the ensuing habit fragmentation are now recognized as one of the main global threats to biodiversity conservation. And that's why, actually, that's one of the reasons why different countries decided to build these infrastructures. And also, if we go back to the map, we can recognize that there are lines, and these lines of pins are actually, they belong to the new roads that are constructed. In addition, recent wildlife road mortality surveys have yielded alarming results, showing high losses for many species. In particular, species that are less mobile, and then therefore are less adaptable and cannot sustain an high degree of habit fragmentation, likely, for instance, small amphibians or smaller mammals, which are not the most dangerous animal for us, as, for instance, are the larger mammals. And also is surprising that we tend to think about bridges for mainly mammals, but there are also bridges for other type of animals, like for instance, this is a bat bridge in central France, near Lyon. And this is very important to me because actually one of the species which is most affected by mortality is actually birds. And how can we deal with that? I've been photographing these bridges as pure architecture in black and white without any car. And this is not something really obvious because actually they are mostly placed under highways, over highways. But I made this statement for myself because I really wanted to have this architectural object as a subject of my images. And the austere bridges architecture is represented therefore in the most dehumanized and aesthetic way as possible. This is inspired a lot by the idea of documentation on one side, and also by Bernd and Illa Becker's work, and especially their fascination for the industrial architecture. Was every picture, photograph cannot be understood as a single image, but can be understood in the global vision of them. And that's why I'm also sometimes presenting them in grids. So the idea was to use the form of document to make something as most, how can I say, most abstract as possible in the end. Even though this is the most concrete element of this system of movement for the animals. And there is something also about the scale. The fact that there are no people doesn't allow us to understand the scale. The only thing that helps us to understand the scale is the presence of the nature. And what I find really interesting in this documentation is the fact that every country, even if this project is a European project, so it's a collective project, in every country we can recognize a different type of architecture. So here, for instance, it's France, and we can also recognize different landscape, which is really important to me, because it helps us to feel the diversity in one land. Here there are some pictures shot in Germany, some other in Czech Republic, and some other in Belgium. And you see that it's very different from what happens in France. And bridges, most of the time, are crossing over roads, and sometimes they cross under, they help animals to cross under, so they become eco-valleys. Or sometimes are specific type of architecture for a specific type of animals. This is, for instance, a bridge for squirrels in the Netherlands, which is an image that is really important to me because it has to do also with the failure. And actually, this bridge never really worked, And I thought that this was really interesting because it was really speaking about the fact that we try to, on one way, to help, and on another way to exert our control on nature. The project is really multi-layered, and for every element I discovered, I also thought to use photography in a slightly different way. So this part of architectural images of the bridges is implemented with a second layer of images that, that deal with pure landscape. Actually, with the landscape, which is connected by the bridges themselves. And I decided to change the way I was photographing it because the subject was different and what I wanted to tell about it was different. The animals live in some sort of paradise, which is built for them, where they are safe and they can move freely. And I thought that I wanted to recall this idea of utopia and of paintings, landscape paintings, where there is this idea of tableau, portraying animals within the ideal landscape connected by the bridges. And yeah, that was really challenging because, you know, animals are not like they're waiting for us to photograph them. So, and I'm not at all a wildlife photographer. So I really had to get in contact with them, but I realized that these spaces are perceived from them as safe spaces. And that's why I could photograph this animal, which was really close to me. I think wildlife crossings tell a lot to us about our relationship as humans with animals, not only through architecture, but also through the symbols of our power over them. And the ecological corridors, in fact, like the paradise territory in Utopia, have borders that force the animals to stay within a predetermined territory, outside which it reigns some chaos. And that's exactly what I was searching to not put into these images. That's why they are so quiet. Moreover, for practical reasons, wildlife passages are monitored by a set of technological devices, and that allows us also to clear our idea of how the crossings are used and by whom. So that's also why animals were really important for me. To work on this, I needed to construct a network. I couldn't do it by myself, so I got in contact with a foundation in France, which is called Fondation pour la Biodiversité, Foundation for Biodiversity, which is actually holding all the organizations around the world that are dealing with this subject. And they introduced me the idea of environment and actually the idea of ecosystem. And something triggered my imagination, the fact that on this paradisiac land there are plenty of different ecosystems that are ecosystems on different scales. In a letter to Felice Bauer, Kafka writes that something that sounds like, had you not been lying on the ground among the animals, you wouldn't have been able to see the sky and the stars wouldn't have been set free. Perhaps you wouldn't have survived the terror of standing upright. And this was something that changed, again, my perspective on the topic, and it made me realize that I really want to make it also more free and open to imagination, and also that I should have positioned myself as one of the other, animals. And then I started to think that I wanted to see how animals were dealing with situations not so controlled. So thanks to the Foundation for Biodiversity, I got to discover that in Romania there are areas where animals, especially bears, stay actually on the edges of roads. And I went there to photograph them because I really thought that I needed this just like position, which was again shifting the perspective of this illusional paradise for the animals, and also bringing back to reality, to what normally happens. And I was so much interested in the fact that the animals that were staying along the roads were bears, because actually bears are animals that towards which we have such a complex relationship, because we built social and cultural images on them. One other thing I decided to photograph are the barriers. I thought that this paradise was really interesting to me, especially because of the fact that it's closed inside a bubble. And while reading, I got into this quote by Didi Uberman in a book which is called Passe qui kill coûte, so passing which costs. And that it speaks about concentration camps, as it does a lot. And he speaks about the barbed wire. And he says that it's subtle because, unlike the walls, it gives the feeling of freedom, as it allows one to see what lies beyond. And I thought that was actually the experience I had myself when I visited these areas designed for the animals. And I thought about these images, image I shot back in 2015, where there is this net, this metal net, that allows us to see what lies beyond, but at the same time, it doesn't allow to cross. And at the same time, I find this image really interesting because it's so frontal, so it looks like the same space, it's just in front of us, but still it's separated. And then I started with my practice to question this thing of the barriers, and I realized that again, as the architecture of the bridges, also the architecture of the barriers is different in different countries. And that for sure has to do with ecological reasons, because some ecologists think that you shouldn't have nets because smaller animals can still cross, so they get in danger. But I think it also has to do with the inner structure and the cultural structure of every country. So I also decided to make a series of images that are confronting with this element of the barriers. And then I asked to myself what was happening with the monitoring. And on this, however, as the human need to exercise control again, and that's in order to understand if the machine we put in place works, basically. That's why we monitor, to see if animals are crossing, are moving, which species are moving, to count them. And that's why we know that the bridge for the squirrels doesn't work, because there's a monitoring system that saw that in 3 years only 5 squirrels crosses this bridge. And the images of the surveillance camera placed on the bridges make us discover the presence of the fox, or the deer, or the frog, or the European bison, or introduced to the beluga or the mushwort about a century of his, after its premature disappearance. And what I like about this monitoring system is that we really try to hide it. And again, monitoring is really necessary to answer a series of questions. Does what has been built respond to the reasons for its construction? What species are using it? How does the surrounding landscape is affected by the movement of the animal? Are the crossings using exclusively by animals during dispersals, or also by residents? And what I got to discover looking into the archives of the images recorded by these cameras that are automatically shooting is that actually even people are crossing these bridges. And this for me was really a turning point, because I realized that then these projects could speak about much more than actually the actual and the factual subject, but could also speak about our freedom of movement. And then photography abandons the ich et nunc of the shot itself to seek out in the images of the animals recorded by the camera trap a kind of dystopian fable by a contemporary Aesop. And these images helped me also to search for stories of animals and of people crossing these borders. And I got to discover that sometimes, as it is forbidden for people to walk on these bridges, they really want to go on over and just have for different reasons, an experience of what happens over there. The work will consist also in a video installation that is going to deal with this footage from the camera traps, where I really want to come out this feeling of continuous movement. Most of these videos are super short. They are like 5, 10, 15 seconds, because that's how, for technical reasons, these cameras are set. So there is a continuous movement of animals or other animals as people moving around. And at a certain point, I started to think that I wanted to play with my images and the research I was doing, and that was opening up my mind. So inspired by wonderful text book by Rebecca Solnit, Wanderlust, History of Walking, I started to play with and to write sentences from my research above the images. And this thing is inspired by this book, because this book is made with a double narration, where there is Rebecca's essay, and she also have a continuous quote that goes on the bottom, that goes on the bottom of the book. And the narrations are they are not completely connected, but at the same time they refer one to the other. but they go on different, with different, how can I say, with different, one is slower and another is faster. So they go on with different beats. But I wasn't satisfied about that. So I thought, well, thinking about the exhibition, I thought that I wanted to transform this text into images again, because that's how I work. I mean, that's my way of working as an artist. I produce images. So why not to transform this other, my parallel research, cultural research into images, to expand the imagery evoked by this project. So this was really the factual part of it. And then I started to think to my first inspiration for this project, which is an utopian project by Superstudio, a group of radical architects active in the 70s. And they designed this continuous monument, some sort of endless structure which would allow cosmic order on Earth. And I really liked this fact of the cosmic order on Earth, and the fact that with a single piece of architecture they were thinking to bring back cosmic order on Earth. I thought, when I first thought about, read about this infrastructure that was going through all over Europe for the animals, and which was reconnecting, all the natural, the preserved areas, I thought it was exactly the same idea of this continuous monument. There was an infrastructure going over another infrastructure, which is our cities, our roads, our highways, our railways, and was trying to bring back order. And I know it's different, especially because there was no nature preview on the continuous monument, but still, this triggered my imagination so much. So I decided that I wanted to make a picture about this continuous monument, and it's not yet there. But I met the last living Superstudio, and we are working on producing this picture with the elements that he has at his studio, recalling the continuous monument. And also, I thought to myself that I needed also to photograph some architecture built by the animals. So I started studying architecture built by the animals, and there are plenty, of course. But when I encountered these termite mounds, I immediately knew that they were the perfect juxtaposition of what I was doing with the bridges for the animals. Termite mounds are huge structures built by termites, so very small animals, and we see them as some sort of mountains, or I don't know, objects, sculptures, but actually they have a very complex infrastructural system inside them. So it was, for that reason, the perfect juxtaposition. So I went all the way to Australia to photograph them, because I got to know that over there are some of the biggest in the world, like 6 meter high, and it could be a good, again, juxtaposition of what I was doing myself with the infrastructure, the architecture we built for the animals. And then, I mean, this is not like temporarily consequential, but everything crosses in time, but I'm just showing it in this order for a logical reason. Then I started to think that we as humans, always needed or searched to represent ourselves. And we have been doing it since the very beginning, representing ourselves together with the animals, and even more representing animals, more animals than humans ourselves. So I realized that I wanted to include in this project some images I made in the prehistorical site of Naquane, which is a prehistorical site in Italy, northern Italy, where actually there are these prehistorical engravings depicting all these animals and all these small people dealing with the animals around them. And this was really important to me because I've been reading something that triggered my imagination, which is actually an essay by Hervé Lebras, which is called L'âge des migrations, the age of migrations, where he reminds us that the paleontologist's conviction that Homo sapiens owes its survival and success to the ability of migrate, which allowed our progenitors to survive in the ice age cycles and heat waves of the last 100,000 years. And also probably the fact that sapiens was not just better than the others, but he met others and then he could survive and also evolve. So this, like, getting back to our representation of the animals then suddenly became really important to me. And yeah, and somehow this was important because it brought me back to the question of how and why we should look at animals in today's world of multinational capitalism. We can only answer that our mental and physical gaze on animals can call into questions the human order, which is actually what I'm trying to put in place with my work. An order that is still visible but increasingly less central. And then I went back to real animals, if we can say that this is real. While traveling for shooting the bridges for the animals, I also entered in research centers as much as I could. And in Slovenia, I found out a small research center that deals with castors and lutras. And what really fascinated me is the fact that they were showing these taxidermized animals. And at the very beginning, I thought, okay. But then I've been reading under the animal, the taxidermized animal, little story that they wrote, which was about the fact that this animal was hit by a car. All the animals that they were showing were hit by car. But they also tried to write about the road that these animals were trying to do. So it was really speaking about this trying of, try of moving that these animals were doing. And this reminded me about something vernacular. And that's my passion for vernacular things. It reminded me about a cartoon that I was used to look at when I was a child, which is called The Adventures of the Small Forest, something like that, Le avventure del bosco piccolo, and was a terrible cartoon about animals attempting to cross the road to get in a new land because they were expropriated of their land and they were hit by car and they were, taking a lot of danger. And that brought me back to probably some unconscious reason that fascinated me in this topic. But also the fact of finding these taxidermized animals shown as objects started to make me think again about movement and what animals' movement implies. So I started to think, and I started to think that animals, by moving, change the landscape themselves, because they bring, like in their skin or while eating, they bring around seeds. So they, in the end, will change completely, or it's just an image in my head. But I have this idea that all this system of animals moving will change the landscape of Europe. So I decided to photograph some box of seeds that are collected in the herbarium of La Sapienza University in Rome, which I luckily seen a year ago for another project. And I realized that this box of seeds was so important for me, first of all, because it recalled this idea of changing the landscape throughout the movement of the animals, but at the same time, because seeds are, and then therefore nature, it's categorized inside this box, and also it's closed, it's strictly divided by grids that we design to understand it. And this grid reminded me of something that I really wanted to include in the project, that was the grid, the net, the barbed wire that I was speaking about before. So I decided to photograph also representation or fences, real fences. And then I went to the Netherlands, where I got to discover that there is something which is called in English the wire of death, and it is a representation. So it's just something that recalls something that existed back in the past. That was a lethal electric fence created by German military to control the Dutch-Belgian border frontier after the occupation of Belgium during the First World War. And I thought that this was slowly allowing me to use this project to speak about human migration. And also, it's interesting that this fence, this representation of fence, it's located in the Netherlands, nearby the border with Belgium, because actually in the Netherlands there is something which is really triggering, which is called the paradox of Barle, where there are 22 Belgian enclaves in the Netherlands. And then this thing of borders was really becoming important in the project. So I decided to make a further step and go to a border which triggered me a lot since when I got to know about it, which is the border between Hungary and Serbia, and didn't trigger me for some visual reason, even though visually it's really strong. But it triggered me from the first time I got to know about it for another reason, because it was called, or some people called it the speaking fence, the Hungarian government built a fence which was constantly speaking to people getting close to it in 5 different languages. Something like, attention, attention, I'm warning you that you are at the Hungarian border, at the border crossing, which is the property of Hungarian government. If you damage the fence, cross illegally or attempt to cross, it's counted as a crime in Hungary. I'm warning you to hold back from committing this crime. You can submit your asylum application in the transit zone. And then it was starting to say the same thing in the other 4 languages. And the fence keeps on speaking to every person getting close in different languages, which was for me really, really crazy. And of course, it's something that has to do with propaganda more than protection. And when I got there, the fence is not speaking anymore because the locals protested because they couldn't sleep, as it was constantly speaking. But what triggered me when I got there is that I parked my car and I realized that the area just in front of the fence was a Natura 2000 area. So ideally, for me, everything was reconnecting. And I had the possibility for a clear, also geographical reason to include this fence in my project. And as every project is, for me at least, a sum of having a clear plan and just finding things on the road, on the way. When I went to Romania, I also find this bridge for the animals where someone took the effort to write Honor and Patria. And I thought that was really important to bring back this idea that landscape is a political act, and in all the landscape there is something which is political, and my work itself, I think, it's political, and even if it's quiet and even if it's subtle, I hope it will address a clear political statement. So, to conclude, my images, the texts, the architecture, the stories of the animals in their complexity aim to provide a nuance in the vision of control, power, and politics, and in particular how this exercise through territorial planning and land design, and eventually the environment. In the end, I think this work explores the tensions that emerge from the power that human beings try to exert over nature. But I also think it speaks about the contradictory relationship between infrastructure construction, policy, and freedom of movement, and nature conservation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marina. There are so many layers.
Yeah.
And yeah, everything was, it was very interesting to go through all the process and all your consideration, like very personal consideration. I'm curious to know what are the next places you're going to visit?
Yeah. Well, you saw the